Oh, what is dilling my dogs? I'm Robert Evans, and this is Behind the Bastards, a podcast about Scott Adams, a man whose self-awareness is so minimal that he often, his hands clip through his writing desk like he's a character in a video game from the N64 era. I don't know. How was that, Randy?
That's perfect. That is exactly what I would say.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we have Randy Milholland, artist behind Something Positive, a wonderful webcomic, and now the legally the brain, at least the limbic system of Popeye the Sailor Man. Randy, how are we feeling as we come into part 2 of this? I am just
series? So thankful that you invited me on an episode that probably does not involve child vivisection.
Oh, no child vivisection. He is going to, by his claim, kill a kid in this. So
oh good.
But I don't think he really did. I think he's just taking credit for it in a way that's kind of more upsetting than if he just killed a child. I don't know. Maybe that's not right.
At least now there's not a kid who's dead. But that's a weird fucking...
Oh, there's a kid who's dead. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Good.
A kid dies in this episode. We're fine. It's all good.
Well, I mean, isn't that a responsibility of every episode of Behind the Bastards? Yeah. At least one child must die. No,
as soon as I announce that a child is going to die in this episode, you know, like the last scene in Return of the Jedi, where it like goes around the galaxy as all of the people are celebrating in their different planets. That was the Behind the Bastards fans. They're terrible people.
The remnant is just a flame.
Yeah. It's Coruscant. It's the Coruscant of our... I don't know why I'm doing Star Wars. Everyone's tired of Star Wars. Think of another... Imagine I did another one. A different
Star Trek
thing. No, I feel like that one's pretty saturated too. What's one nobody knows about?
Farscape.
Farscape, that's right.
Farscape is goddamn amazing.
Yeah, imagine I did a Farscape.
There you go.
God. Okay, so... Back to Scott. Early in his career, Scott Adams started receiving requests for public speaking engagements, and he realized that this could be a good side business for him. You know, colleges wanted him to talk, and also a lot of like corporations wanted him to come and like give speeches for their employees because they would, you know, you're some manager, you see people have like Dilbert cartoons up over their cubicles, and you're like, oh, well, let's pay this rich man money that could be going to races for our workers so they can hear this weirdo talk about how he draws Dilbert. That'll make them happy. So Scott, realizing that this was a thing that he might make some bank on, enrolled in a Dale Carnegie course. And this is while he was still working at Pacific Bell, but drawing Dilbert. His employer was kind of willing to foot the bill because they saw it as beneficial to them. And Scott didn't know how to do any public speaking. And so he felt like this would help him. Now, do you know anything about Dale Carnegie?
That name Randy? Sounds familiar, and it doesn't make me happy that it's familiar.
You've all... Like most people, you may not recognize his name, but everyone's heard of this guy's book. He's the guy who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my dad had that book. My dad had
Yeah, I'm going to guess something approaching 100% of our listeners had one or more family members with this book in their house. It's an It's one of the best-selling books in the history of like writing. You know, say what you will about it. That's undeniable. Dale Carnegie was born in 1888. He's an American writer and a lecturer. And yeah, he got rich writing this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It is still a best-selling book to this day. It has sold probably like just an unbelievable number of copies. Whether or not this is a good thing kind of depends on your perspective. But as far as I can tell, I don't think Dale, you know, there's a lot you can say about him. He was kind of like, I would say like a lame man, but he was not like evil, right? He's not like, this is not one of those like, I'm subtly writing this book about like how to influence people so you can like sexually assault them. Like, you know, you're talking about like modern, you know, like Andrew Tate types. Like, he's not that kind of guy. He's just sort of like a little grifty, I guess, in kind of his like, I don't think he is a grifter, but like the way he talks is very appealing to them. And the things he's telling you how to do is kind of appealing to them.
Who's going to want that book more?
Yeah, it's definitely like that's who we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, so Dale, he had been kind of he had been like a salesman who kind of quits his career midstream to become an actor. And just sort of like in order to make ends meet, he starts out teaching public speaking classes, like while he's being a stage actor. And he finds out that he's like a lot better at that than the actual acting, and that there's a lot more money in it. During one session with a bunch of people trying to learn how to do public speaking better, Dale started asking his students, while he's trying to like coach them how to get up in front of a room of people and talk. He starts asking his students to talk about something that made them really angry. And he noted that like people who were really reticent, who had trouble getting up in front of people and talking, when they started talking about something that pissed them off, they were able to get over their fear of public speaking more easily. Right. Which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's not I mean, it's kind of worth noting. It's worth being the guy who writes that down. I'm not taking anything away from it, but that's not like for us today. And that's most of like Dale's actual good advice is stuff that today we're just like, well, yeah, if you're pissed off, it's easier to like not think about the fact that you're nervous in front of a group of people or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dale kind of used this and some other revelations he had teaching these classes as the basis for a book that promised to improve self-confidence for the average reader and teach them how to change the behavior of others by altering their own behavior towards those people. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, other than that some of Dale's advice works pretty well. And kind of more to the point, I think the actual problematic thing is that like, number one, it teaches this kind of overly ritualized, rule-based approach to how to like influence and talk and convince people of things, which can kind of, you know how D&D and stuff works, right? Where you've got like...
Yeah, I play D&D still. So.
Yeah. Where you've got like, okay, you know, here's a character and this character gained a level. And so I pick a feat and this feat works with these other feats and it lets them do these other things. It's very, there's kind of a hierarchy in terms of how a lot of the skills work, right?
Yeah.
Where you get one skill and that allows you to get these other skills. And then you can do these kind of like more complicated acts. That's not really how like charisma works, but books like Dale's, I think, can convince people that that's how it works, that if they just read these books and stack these tactics, then they'll gain these, like, eventually they'll get to do sort of the speaking equivalent of like a whirlwind attack as a barbarian, right? We're here.
Finally, I have mobility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's really not how this stuff works. But I kind of, the fact that people start to believe that's how it works, again, Dale's not like a pickup artist, but this is where we get pickup artistry, right? Like it all kind of descends from the way that Dale talks about how to win friends and influence people. And kind of giving Americans advice on how to be more confident and convincing is kind of like handing a loaded and chambered pistol to a drunken chimpanzee. It's just not a great idea.
No, not.
Yeah, we are, of all of the peoples of Earth, Americans are the ones who needed less self-confidence. A couple more hang-ups would be nice. Yeah, some humility courses. Maybe make us I don't know. We don't do so great when we're scared either. I don't know how to fix America.
Let's move on. Get extra murdered.
Yeah, we should probably just move on. I want to read a quote from his book, or about his book, from an article I found in The Cut, which interviews science writer Maria Konnikova. And Maria is the author of a book on cons and con men called The Confidence Game. And here's Maria talking about Dale. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People is kind of the unofficial con artist's Bible, because a lot of those tactics he talks about in terms of building relationships and being successful in business are ideal for getting people to trust you. One of the really easy things is creating a feeling of familiarity. You're more likely to trust someone who feels more familiar to you. It's even enough to exploit something called the mere exposure effect, where, say, you just go to the same coffee shop as someone every single day, and they may not consciously note you, but all of a sudden you feel more familiar. And a lot of Dale's advice is kind of stuff, again, it's not like necessarily all that problematic. And in fact, it's kind of like The Art of War, in that if you like read it today, because some of the things he wrote about have been so like spread so widely, you'll be really bored. It'll seem it's like very basic stuff to a lot of people today. It's all not necessarily like bad advice, but it's just kind of like basic as hell these days. Like people who obsess over this book today, like people who obsess over The Art of War, are kind of like, I don't know, man, there's like better stuff. Like it's been 100 years. Like there's better books on convincing. Yeah.
It's nice to know it if you want to kind of go back to the basics and see what stuff started. But
yeah,
I mean, no.
Scott's going to kind of religiously love this guy, right? Like he takes this on. This is kind of taking the place of religion for him. And this is going to build what does really, in a lot of ways, replace religion and any kind of like political sensibility as the thing at the core of Scott's understanding of reality and how it works. Like what I was just talking about, that sort of people take this book and they interpret it like it's a D&D manual, right? Full of like feats and skills. And as they level up, they can like stack these feats and skills. Starting with this Dale Carnegie course, that's increasingly how Scott is going to view the world.
I mean, I get it from a certain viewpoint of being like the awkward nerd kid. You're just like, why can't I have a cheat code? Why can't there just be a direct manual? But someone like him who's like, but I want to make sure I'm always the special boy.
Yeah.
Well, and it's manipulation starting off.
The other danger of this, like there is some value if you want to be a public speaker. Public speaking is like a technical skill, and like any other technical skill, if you want to do that for a living, it's not a bad idea to study what other people have written about it, to try to like learn more about it. But when you have this kind of very engineer focused view of how something like public speaking works, of how persuasion works, of how charisma works, then one thing you're not going to do is ever listen to other people, right? Yeah, because they're like the CR 5 monster or whatever that you're trying to figure out how to like drop before it can do any damage to you or something. Like they're not something real.
He sees everyone as a kobold.
Yeah,
they're like half CR at best.
Yeah, exactly. That's how you're gonna look at the world, and that's not a great way to look at the world if you want to like have humility or be capable of like change and personal evolution. Anyway, I do think it's interesting that these Dale Carnegie teachings, how they may have influenced what I always considered to be one of Scott's more reasonable philosophical claims. And this is going to take us back into the weeds a little bit. So Lawrence Peter was a Canadian professor who eventually came to teach at the University of Southern California. His specialty on paper, he's a professor of education. But over the years, Peter felt drawn to studying organizations and why they succeeded or failed in different circumstances. And he came to believe that the best way to do that was to study hierarchies within organizations and how they functioned and how they became dysfunctional. He started to call himself a hierarchologist, which is both a fun term. It doesn't spell well, but if you like say it out to yourself, it kind of works pretty well. And yeah, he saw himself as like someone who studies how different hierarchical systems function and don't function. Lawrence was also a funny guy. He was kind of renowned for peppering his different writings and essays and papers with witticisms like, "Noblest of all dogs is the hot dog. It feeds the hand that bites it." That's a Lawrence Peter original.
Okay, I mean that's a fun little quote. I can see that.
Yeah, it's not a bad little jape. In 1969, Lawrence co-wrote a book called The Peter Principle. The nut of the argument he made in the book was this, quote, "In a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. In time, every post tends to be occupied by an employee who is incompetent to carry out its duties. Work is accomplished by those employees who have not yet reached their level of incompetence." Now, that is something, number one, if you've ever worked in any kind of large corporation, you will be like, yeah, that's how shit works a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pessimistic, but unfortunately, it's not inaccurate.
It is not, it's going to be familiar to basically 100% of people who have like worked in corporate America, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you don't believe that's how it always works, because obviously that's not how everything always works, but like everyone encounters people who are in this position, right? Where they were good at something. And that's the whole premise of The Office, right? Of the American Office. Michael Scott was a really good salesman who got promoted well past his level of competence, you know?
I've never seen The American Office. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, that's the premise of the show. Okay. It's all based on the Peter Principle, right?
You're doing great, Robert.
Thank you. Hey, let people watch that.
I think it should be noted that this is one of the few times he, like, a pop culture reference of a man's podcast, and the guests didn't get it, but Robert did.
Randy, you are very, very, very correct.
Yeah. You know what? I'm sick of all of you. I'm going to go listen to my Ariana Grande records.
Wow, you did it! Oh my gosh, that's growth.
Oh wait, I was trying to pronounce it wrong. Did I accidentally get it right?
You got it right.
Son of a bitch. What a shameful moment for me. I'm going to go read the name of some British towns to get my mojo back.
There you go. My God.
All I'm saying is I've infiltrated your mind.
Yeah. No, today, you know what? The only way for me to get back on top, I'm gonna read Welsh street signs. See how that goes for me.
Jesus Christ.
Small backwoods Massachusetts town names.
So yeah, Lawrence Peter, writes this book about how people get, people who are competent get promoted past their level of incompetence, and that's how like hierarchies work. Now, Peter is not pretending to write like a super serious book of psychology. He's not trying to write a business book either. It's a satire, right? Or at least at various points, he will say that it's a satire. And there's a lot of like joking bits in it. For example, all of the evidence that he cites to support his argument comes from what he calls his hypothetical case file. So he's not like citing from like real things that happened. He's citing from like hypothetical stories, some of which are probably based on things he heard or things that happened to him. But it's very tongue in cheek, this book, right? And he would later claim that the principle is the, quote, key to understanding of the whole structure of civilization. That's kind of, and again, he's like sort of joshing around a little bit, but he's also like, there's something deep there. Like this is like, I think a valuable warning and a valuable observation about how hierarchy very often tends to work, right? Because this happens throughout government, throughout the business world, in militaries. Like this is just a thing, and it's
education, nonprofits.
Yeah, and you can go back 10,000 years, looking at the best documentation we have of different rulers of different and you'll find evidence of the Peter Principle. It's all throughout human history.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of like he's taken the piss a little bit, but yeah, there's quite a bit there. Now, the business community almost instantly adopted Lawrence's idea, even though he was kind of like joking with it. This is a hugely influential text for business people, for MBAs and shit. And today, the Peter Principle is taken very seriously by people who are like professionals at organizing corporate structures. In a few seconds Googling, I found a Harvard Business Review article on, quote, overcoming the Peter Principle, and a Forbes article titled New Evidence the Peter Principle is Real. And I'm going to read a relevant quote from that real quick. 3 professors, Alan Benson of the University of Minnesota, Danielle Lee of MIT, and Kelly Shue of Yale, analyzed the performance of 53,035 sales employees at 214 American companies from 2005 to 2011. During that time, 1,531 of those sales reps were promoted to become sales managers. The data show that the best salespeople were more likely to A, be promoted, and B, perform poorly as managers. So like there's actual data, behind this. Obviously not a universal rule, but quite robust. So Scott Adams presumably learns about the Peter Principle while he's getting his MBA, right? Like he's kind of doing his MBA right at the time when the Peter Principle is kind of going viral in corporate America. There's almost no way he wouldn't have read about this and probably was at like conferences and stuff where people talk about it. And in 1996, just as Dilbert was blowing up, he decided to put his own spin on the Peter Principle in his first text-based book. So this is not like a book of cartoons. This is like a nonfiction book, The Dilbert Principle.
I was wondering if that was the book. Yeah.
It sure is. It sure is, which I read when I was like 10.
What kind of 10-year-old were you?
I was a 10-year-old who, like, I would go through sometimes 3 or 4 books in a week, like, I always wanted stuff to read.
Things like that. I was like,
well, I got a lot. So my uncle, who had all the comics, was the guy also. He worked at a bookstore, and he would bring back what were called strip cop books, which is like books that hadn't sold.
I know exactly what you're talking about. The ones that we can't. Yeah, those are great.
So everything I read either came from those books or from his library, and he had a lot of Dilbert books, so I read a lot of Dilbert books. Yeah.
It's surprising. I guess because also Dilbert came out when I was much older.
Yeah.
And when I think about what I was reading at 10 was like D&D novels.
Yeah, I read a lot of those. A lot of Dragonlance. I
felt very advanced. A lot of Weiss and Hickman. Read, Scott Adams at that point. Like, I've read Hitchhiker's Guide at age 10.
Yeah.
But, like, I remember trying to pick... Actually, I tried to pick up once. My dad had a copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People because my father was a union president and he did a lot of things. And I remember picking it up and he's like, "You're too young for that. Go read something fun." and yanked it out of my hands.
That's honestly great parenting. Like, don't read this. This will turn you into one of these weirdos. Like, go read something that'll make you laugh. Now, I'm pretty sure at the time I read this, I was like veering between the Wheel of Time series and Dilbert books. So, I was a weird kid.
Weird whiplash.
Yeah, I was a weird kid for sure. Anyway,
at least we're reading gore books. That's all I care about.
Yeah. Good God, that's another episode. We'll get to that one of these days.
So Gorgons.
Yeah. This was basically the Dilbert principle, as Scott describes it, is basically an inversion of the Peter principle. Instead of observing that hierarchies tended to elevate competent people past the level where they are good at what they do, Adams envisioned hierarchy in business as a defense mechanism to elevate incompetent people to positions of upper management where they don't actually have anything to do and thus are less likely to interfere with the people who actually produce work. Right? Now, if you've also, you've probably, I think this is less common for people in the Peter principle, because I think most of us have stories of upper management who have fucked around in our shit. But if you've worked in a company, you've seen this too. Both the Peter principle and Scott's Dilbert principle. These are things that you can observe in the world, right? These are not and I think both principles can be useful observations about the way organizations work and about pitfalls to avoid when creating organizations. The Peter principle, I believe, is a lot more durable. It describes a much more widespread, I would say nearly universal phenomenon. I can think back to my own career at Cracked. All of my friends and I started out writing funny articles and got promoted to managing teams and doing a lot of work that we had absolutely no aptitude for, because we just wanted to make our funny little japes, and suddenly we're handling all of this employment shit. And there was a tough learning curve there. I
that
think
sounds kind of hellish. I'm not gonna lie.
There were, it was good and it was bad. It worked better than it should have for a long time. But I can definitely say, and it's not comprehensive, right? Because we all still wrote articles and made videos and did the stuff we were good at. I think the thing that I would say, if I was going to make a maybe a more generalizable, version of the Peter principle, is that competent people get promoted to the point where they spend less and less of their time on the thing they're best at. Right?
Yeah, I can see that.
If you're not, you have to, or at least you have to be very careful to avoid that happening, right? Because it's just kind of naturally what hierarchical structures do to people who are good at shit. So yeah, I do think that Scott's Dilbert principle, while I have seen versions of this in my own life, is a lot less widely applicable. For one thing, upper management constantly makes decisions that impact the lives of people who actually produce shit and interfere with them getting stuff done. And Scott knows this. He parodies this in a lot of his early strips, right? Management making dumb decisions that fuck shit up. Layoffs, in order to jinx stock prices that force out productive workers in business units, that kind of shit. And it's one of those things where I will give Scott some credit because there's in this book kind of some valuable observations. And I don't think most of it's I don't think they're valuable observations to adults. I think this book is pretty basic for anybody who's been out and lived in the world. But as an 11 or 12-year-old kid, there were a couple of things that I found pretty influential. And in fact, I'm going to read one passage that I encountered at a young age that I think is a pretty healthy thing for a young man to encounter at a young age. Here's Scott. I proudly include myself in the idiot category. Idiocy in the modern age isn't an all-encompassing 24-hour situation for most people. It's a condition that everybody slips into many times a day. Life is just too complicated to be smart all the time. The other day, I brought my pager to the repair center because it wouldn't work after I changed the battery. The repairman took the pager out of my hand, flipped open the battery door, turned the battery around, and handed the now functional pager back to me in one well-practiced motion. This took much of the joy out of my righteous indignation over the quality of their product, but the repairman seemed quite amused, and so did every other customer in the lobby. On that day, in that situation, I was a complete idiot. Yet somehow I managed to operate a motor vehicle to the repair shop and back. It is a wondrous human characteristic to be able to slip into and out of idiocy many times a day without noticing the change or accidentally killing innocent bystanders in the process. And I think that's actually a pretty good observation. I think it's also this obsession that we have through media with hyper competent protagonists. Yeah. Isn't real. Like, there's nobody who's like that I've ever met in my life. And if you kind of accept that you will be, if you're able to accept your incompetence in given situations, you're a lot less likely to, for example, try to wire your own house and wind up electrocuting yourself to death. You know? Like,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It was a useful thing to come across as a kid.
It's not a bad lesson. Like the whole, sometimes you're the idiot.
Yeah. And everyone is. The world is too complicated for you to know how to, like, you can know how to, like, from the ground up, how like the Android or iPhone is coded, right? You can be an engineer at Apple or Google and know everything about like how the actual software on your phone works. But like, you probably don't know how to solder the entire thing together. And you certainly don't know how to like mine the rare earth minerals and like put together we're all out of our depth. If you really think about it all the time, it's other people around us who know what they're doing and who have figured things out and that keep shit going, right? Like, I don't know how to operate a power plant, but thankfully there are people who do. You know, it's like humbling and valuable to think that way.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know how to run a podcast. And I was going to be like, yep.
Sophie,
wow.
Wow. Hurtful, but yes, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't even know what a podcast is. Like, I've been trained to shout at this blinking light when the box in my cage turns on. And that's what all of this is.
That's how you get the food pellets.
Yeah.
Did you see that it's now blinking blue, which means ad break?
Speaking of shouting from your cage at a blinking light, here's ads. We're back. So I've just said, I think that Scott's got a good observation here, a useful thing for certainly a young person to encounter. The caveat to this is I don't believe Scott believes a word that he's written there. Or at least if he did at one point believe it, he no longer does. But I don't think he ever really did. For one thing, this book, The Dilbert Principle, sells 1 million copies, which causes his ego to metastasize like a cancer and devour his mind. I kind of think the more I've learned about him and the more I've learned about the stuff that he read and that's influenced him, I think his like, we're all idiots, especially me, you know, I'm dumb a lot of the time, kind of stuff, this kind of self-deprecating thing he does, I think it's a calculated shtick rather than evidence of humility. And I think part of why I believe this is this line I came across in that interview with Maria Konnikova. And here she is again, describing a strategy from Dale Carnegie's book that is really popular with con artists. There's also the Mark Antony gambit, which comes from Shakespeare, where Mark Antony begins a speech by saying, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. He says the opposite of what he then goes on to do, but he primes people to think that he's on their side. And I kind of think there's a version of, like, Scott's doing a version of that with this, right? Like, he's saying, like, we're all idiots, you know, especially me, I'm dumb most of the time. But he's also, that's being packaged as like, and look at how smart I am for realizing this and delivering this to you, you know? Like, there's a little bit of, we could call it like kayfabe there, right? Yeah. So Scott's books get increasingly popular from here on out. The next year, he publishes The Dilbert Future, which, of course, I also read as a small child. The subtitle of the book was Thriving on Stupidity in the 21st Century. It's a pretty forgettable book. You would call it like a pop futurist text about how technological development will impact people in the future. Again, pretty forgettable. It does include the prediction technology and homeliness will combine to form a powerful type of birth control, which is a joke in the book, but I think Scott's going to kind of wind up pseudo incel in a lot of like his ideology and a lot of the things he says. I think you could see this as like a precursor to that. He is currently, like this week as we talk, chatting with Andrew Tate about how nobody likes sex really. Like, it's not that good.
Wow. Tell on yourself there, buddy.
Yeah, you might be telling on yourself a little bit there, Scott.
We were going to see a screen capture of someone like saying women don't actually orgasm. I've had sex with women that've never, like, oh, buddy, no.
And well, it's, you know what I'll say for like the women don't enjoy sex guys? That's fucked up, but they generally do enjoy sex. They just don't think women do. Scott's like, boy, we all actually hate sex, right? And it's like, for one thing, Scott, there's like, if you want to like explore this, you might learn some stuff about yourself and come to accept some things, but it would take having kind of a more nuanced and plastic view of human intimacy that I think you're capable of having. But I don't know. If you were more of a self-reflective guy.
Well, learning he was ace.
Yeah, I don't know that he is, but some of the stuff he says is like, well, Scott, if you think that you've never, maybe, I don't know, a more thoughtful person might like come to some conclusions about himself through that. Scott just decides that everybody feels the same way, and we're all lying about enjoying sex for some reason, which, I don't know, feel about that however you want. So the weird part of the book of the Dilbert future comes near the end when Scott starts writing about his habit of making affirmations for the first time. He gives a couple of examples of times that affirmations worked for him, and both repeatedly gives a caveat that he's not saying there's anything supernatural happening here, and also kind of leaving the impression that he thinks he's discovered some kind of magical reality hack. Over time and far too many books, Scott's feelings on the Dilbert principle and affirmation. Do you know what affirmations are?
Yeah, it's a whole like speak your truth and the universe will.
Yeah.
And the way secret, isn't it? Basically,
it's the secret, right? You have to ask if you tell the universe what you're going to get or what you want, like it'll provide it for you. There's some rules to it generally, like the way Scott sees it. He has to like write it down a certain number of times a day. You have to be really specific about the thing that you're going to do. So it's not just like, I want to do well in this class, but I'm going to improve my score on this, exam from this to this or something like that. You have to be very, and like, I don't think there's actually anything wrong with this idea. Like if affirmations help you focus your mind, focus on building skill in something, I think for reasonable people, this thing can be kind of a version of like meditation, right? Where I
think for most people, the worst you can be is just a harmless thing you did.
Yeah.
And it's a personal ritual. And even that can be still calming.
Yeah, it could be calming. It can help you you get up in the morning and you write your affirmations. That helps you focus on like the things that you're going to work on. That's perfectly healthy. If that works for you, like that's a great thing to do. Scott is, I think, kind of inherently hardwired to go really dogmatic about this stuff. Like he presents himself as very much like an atheist and a rationalist, but he builds these kind of like labyrinthine rule systems about this stuff rather than being like, affirmations really helped me focus my mind and I did well on that test. He has to like set up these kind of increasingly arcane rule systems. He's the kind of guy, again, if he was a little more open-minded, a little cooler, he would have been like in the 1800s, like one of these guys writing books about magic. He would have like convinced himself he was a wizard, and probably would have been a healthier, happier person. Become a wizard, Scott Adams. You'll like it more than being, I don't know, a weird racist on YouTube.
I look forward to the new book, Dilbert Mancy.
Yeah, Dilbert Mancy. Come on, Scott. At least give us that. We're owed it.
The pointy-headed Gandalf.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, come on. So, over time, kind of this Scott's feelings on the Dilbert principle and affirmations will evolve into this kind of labyrinthine scientifico-religious ideology with one goal, and that goal is explaining why Scott Adams deserved his fame and incredible wealth, right? And that's the really problematic thing about Scott here, is that he's focusing all of this stuff. He's not just using it as like here's how you can improve your life. He's using it to kind of a priori justify like why he's earned everything, like why luck didn't play into his life as much as it really did.
But why does he care? Like, because no one else is like asking why does Scott deserve money? Like, no one, that never comes up.
I think it's simple, which is that if you are really successful in a field where the odds are long and against you, as Scott often notes, and you suddenly make a shitload of money and become famous, it's pretty natural to be terrified that it might end, because you never fully understand why it happened, right? Yeah. There's always people around you who are just as talented, who work just as hard, and shit doesn't work out for. And the fact that some people make it and some people don't is kind of scary, right? And I think, again, the mentally healthy thing to do is kind of embrace the humility that should engender in you, and have that influence how you treat other people. and how you try to give other people opportunities and try to level the playing field and try to provide options for people who benefit from luck less than you. The unhealthy way to do it is to find justification. Some people use religion. Scott's weirder about it for why you deserve, like, and it's because in Scott's case, I discovered the secret rules of the universe and, hacked my way into being an influencer. I'm a master persuader.
Was really in that egg he found when he was a child, not just $10, secrets. The
secret. And that's kind of the primary immorality at the center of Scott Adams in a lot of ways, I think. So before Scott sort of degenerates to a Trump reply guy, which is where this is building towards, he got the chance to make his own television show. On January 25th, 1999, Dilbert launched as an adult animated sitcom on UPN, the network where I watched Star Trek Voyager as a little kid. It was the highest rated comedy series premiere in network history, but very few people watched UPN, so that's not much praise. The show had quite a lot going for it, though. Larry Charles, who was a Seinfeld writer, was on the development team. Danny Elfman, as we've talked about, was like the theme music, and it's got some great voices in it. Daniel Stern, who's Marv from Home Alone, did a lot of the voices. Kathy Griffin does a voice. Jason Alexander is up in there, from, again, a lot of like Seinfeld.
I remember the actor who did the boss, because he's a really good comedian.
I think it's
Larry something.
Yeah. I forget.
He always played the really good smug asshole in the 80s and 90s.
The voices are pretty good. It's not like an incompetent show. Like, it's not bad. Whenever it comes online now, people who watched it as kids are like, well, the show was actually really good. I did rewatch a lot of it recently. I wouldn't say it's really good, but for an adult animated series in 1999, it's perfectly fine, right?
It was different. It was something that wasn't trying to be The Simpsons, which was rare at that point. And it wasn't trying to go the opposite direction of Family Guy, let's be as edgy and weird as we can. No, it's just it gave what it promised. It was Dilbert as a show.
It sure was, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Chris Elliott was Dogbert? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Larry Milholland was the boss.
Yeah, it all the voices are all pretty competent. So here's all Scott says about it in his 2002 book, published a year or so after the show's second season and cancellation. In 1998, I started working on what would become the Dilbert TV show that ran on UPN during 1999 and 2000. We had a tiny operating budget, so I found myself doing more of the writing than I had expected. Now, I don't actually know what went on in that writer's room and how much of the good parts of the show were the Seinfeld guy and the other writers, how much of it was Scott. But you get a taste of Scott Adams in this series. His voice shines through. And when it does, it's often in uncomfortable ways. And I'm going to play you a clip now from an episode. And this is one where Dilbert's antagonist in this episode is a bad guy whose name is literally Bob Bastard. And Bob is trying to unfairly sabotage an invention that Dilbert made. And as a result of Bob being an asshole, everyone, and especially the female engineer Alice, loves him, right? And Alice falls madly in love with him, even though he's nothing but a dick to her. This is a very uncomfortable scene, but it's not hard to see what Scott's trying to say here. You get another little glimpse of that sort of attitude he's got.
I'm already bracing.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing?
I'm not doing anything.
Why are you dressed like that?
I'm not dressed like that.
You're trying to look like him.
Don't be ridiculous. It's just that all my non-Bob Bastard imitation clothes are in the laundry. This is all I have left.
What has happened to you? Are you in Bob Bastard's camp now?
He has a camp? Cool.
Why do I try?
I think we make a terrific couple, Alice.
You really think so?
No, I'm just toying with your emotions. Since I caught you in such a good mood, can I borrow another $50?
Another 50?
Oh, forget it! If you're gonna lay some kind of trip on me, I'll see you around!
No, wait. Okay, here.
Make that $100. I'm saving up for a new mask.
What do you mean you're changing your name?
Well, seriously, don't you think it sounds good? Wally Bastard.
Have you lost your...
All right, that's enough. You get it, right?
Yep, women fall for abusive jerks.
Yeah, women fall for abusive jerks. The unsaid part is not like me, Scott Adams. Why don't they love me? I'm so much better than all of the guys who get the... It's very... You see this all over the internet now. Scott was a trailblazer, ahead of his time with this sort of shit.
Being a whiny little piece of shit.
Yeah. You also kind of get signs of this, of kind of what is now for Scott an abiding hatred of all journalists, who he seems to think are unethical by nature of doing their job. He thinks it's like unethical to report on stuff that's happening in the world. This is now a pretty standard belief on the far right, but was less common in 2002, and it's pretty clear in this clip.
What makes you qualified to be a reporter? I'm willing to violate anyone's privacy for my personal gain and then claim with a straight face that the public has a right to know.
God,
all right, so not subtle, right? And it's one of those things that people who are remembering this as a good show, like, it's not bad for the time, but like, there's not a great density of comedy in these bits here, right? Like it's got its moments, but a lot of it's like weird and off-putting, and I think most of the off-putting parts are Scott's voice just kind of shining through clear as a bell. Anyway, the show gets canceled in 2002.
It got picked up by Adult Swim for a little bit though, didn't it? Like all the
it does like reruns and stuff.
Yeah, they also got Home Movies, which was also a UPN show.
Home Movies, which was a much better show.
Home Movies had something to say about that. Never, like, I rewatch it every other year. It's so good.
It still holds the fuck up. I periodically find myself singing the Franz Kafka song.
Yes,
but Scott's show gets canceled, and now, if I were to ask you, why do you think Scott's show got canceled? What would your answer be?
It was a very targeted product on a rarely watched network.
Yeah, pretty reasonable thing.
I mean,
yeah, of course, yes. And Scott, to his credit, when he's interviewed about why the show failed in 2006, gives basically that answer. He says it was on UPN, a network that few people watch, and because of some management screw-ups between the first and second seasons, the time slot kept changing and we lost our viewers. We were also scheduled to follow the worst TV show ever made, Shasta McNasty. On TV, your viewership is 75% determined by how many people watch the show before yours. That killed us.
That would probably do it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that Scott's, I think he might be exaggerating a little bit some of that, but like, yeah, that's pretty reasonable, right? Not a lot of people watched it. They moved around the time slot, so people didn't, like, that was more important back then. If you've only ever watched in the streaming era, you may not understand that, but this is not an unreasonable thing for him to believe. However, he's not going to stick with that opinion as to why the show gets canceled for forever, but we're building to that. So right in the middle of the period of the time when the Dilbert TV show is on the air, when it's in fact the comic is at kind of the height of its popularity, Scott decided to try to branch out into another business, the world of health food. And he's going to...
I've been waiting for this one.
Yeah, he creates a product called the Dil Burrito, which he says is like, so Scott is like a vegetarian, and he's angry that there's not any kind of like good, fast, like microwavable food for vegetarians to eat that can fulfill all of their nutritional requirements. He wants something, again, he has this kind of very mechanical at it, which is fine. A lot of people feel this way about food. I know people who they don't particularly enjoy it. They're like, this is why like Soylent's a popular thing with some people. So you guys have heard of Soylent, which is like this, they're these meal replacement sort of like, I don't know, shake is a little bit of an odd term, but like it's a drink, basically a drinkable meal, fulfills all of the necessary caloric requirements, and you can do it quick. And I know some people who do it because it makes weight loss easier for them. Some people, they just don't have a lot of time in the day, so it's good for, I know people who take Soylent because like when you're doing drugs for 36 hours with your friends, you might forget to eat, and it's easier to like pound a Soylent than actually like eat a meal when you're on so much ketamine that like the world is like melting all around you. Scott wants this because he just wants like a simple thing people can microwave and get all of their nutrients. He describes it as wanting to make... It's not a bad
thing to want. It's a
fine idea.
Like,
sure.
I don't eat a lot of meat, and I would love to have like just simple make this in 5 minutes.
Of course. It's the most reasonable thing he's ever wanted to do. He does describe it as the blue jeans of food, which I find kind of funny, but like there's appeal to that. So the problem is that Scott doesn't know how to do this. Like Scott has no idea how to make food. You don't get the feeling he's a great cook. And he certainly does not have any experience in like the business of mass producing food. So he launches this product, which he calls the Dil Burrito. I would say not great branding either. It initially comes in Mexican, Indian, barbecue, garlic, and herb flavors. It's described as being a tortilla-wrapped comestible consisting of vegetables, rice, beans, and seasonings that contain all of the 23 vitamins and minerals that nutritionists say are essential. Now, when you jam as much nutrients as he's like, he describes it as like a vitamin pill wrapped in a tortilla. And when you shove all of those vitamins and stuff into a single burrito, it can have some negative consequences on your gastrointestinal tract. As Scott would later say, because of the veggie and legume content, 3 bites of the Dil Burrito made you fart so hard your intestines formed a tail. It is a disaster as a product. Millions of dollars. It gets just lit on fire by this thing. I've talked to people who apparently ate them and said that they were pretty fucking nasty. And to be fair, Scott describes them as pretty bad too. So there you go. The Dil Burrito. Kind of a funny little moment. But not evil, right? He probably caused, disaster.
I had friends, I had a roommate, we weren't roommates at the time, who, he was a tech guy. He was a vegetarian, bordering on vegan. And he hesitated because he's like, well, I like the idea of fast food. I just don't know that I would trust a fellow nerd making my food. And then someone else we knew ate it and basically begged us to never try it because they basically thought they were going to shit their actual brain out. Like, they described it as diarrhea so bad they could feel their capillaries moving out of their body. It's just like, nope, don't need that.
Incredible.
And like, I mean, what a weird
incredible
food around too. Because like there was a Dagwood restaurant chain in the mid-aughts. That makes sense. Dagwood eats a lot.
Yeah, if you're selling like the biggest sandwich anyone's ever seen, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's but like this is like, I mean, this isn't quite as bad as the Garfield restaurant they attempted in Toronto. Yeah. But didn't Adams also try to do a restaurant at one point? Or was I just...
He did do a restaurant. We have so much to cover. I don't think we're going to get into it. But yeah, he ran an unsuccessful kind of restaurant in the Bay Area at one point in time.
Jesus.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Like it is kind of like going to Dilbert, like using him as the mascot for fast food is a little bit like, I don't know, trying to sell mace that's Calvin and Hobbes branded. Like, I just don't see much of a connection. And also I'm like, I don't know if I trust the Calvin and Hobbes guy to sell me mace. He doesn't seem like that's in his wheelhouse.
Charlie Brown brand prophylactics.
Yeah, the Charlie Brown condom. It works as long as, like Charlie Brown, you never have sex.
It has that little weird diagonal like line around his shirt ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh no! Oh god!
Oh god!
Why did I say this?
Heathcliff brand off-roading tires. Like, why are we doing this? What's going on here?
Heathcliff, that might happen. That comic is so fucking weird these days.
Yeah, it does go off the rails. So. This is all fun, but by 2004, Scott, there's some signs of some problematic stuff, but he hasn't done anything fucked up yet, really, in a clear way. He's expressed some odd beliefs, but he's not blaming diversity or black people for his failures publicly yet. Again, the book where that stuff that we talked about comes in from is published in 2008. But 2004 is the point at which things start to go really wrong in his life. Because of a legitimate personal tragedy, he develops the symptoms of a rare neurological condition called spasmodic dysphonia. And I'm going to quote from an article in brainandlife.org here. Adams's experience began in 2004 with what seemed like an extreme allergy-related laryngitis. I used to get laryngitis every May when my allergies were bad, Adams recalls. It would usually last a few days or a few weeks and go away, so I didn't think anything of this particular bout. That was the first of dozens of doctor's visits and an equal number of treatments over several years. I was diagnosed with respiratory problems. Then I was tested to rule out strep throat and acid reflux. From there, I went to an ear, nose, and throat specialist to check for polyps in my vocal cords. Nothing made a distance. I hit a wall. He tried a bunch of herbal remedies, and it's one of those things where, like, this starts out as laryngitis, but it doesn't go away, and it gets worse and worse, and he starts having very basic trouble talking right? Like he's finding it harder and harder to speak. He's trying every scientific and also like herbal fringe remedy that he can come across because he's just increasingly desperate. You know, he's not able to go out and speak anymore. And first his ability to kind of do public speaking goes away, but soon his ability to just like talk to his wife, to talk to his friends goes away. He's unable to kind of communicate very well. He starts getting angry and lashing out at people because he'll try to talk and they won't understand him, and he just gets like enraged at this. Eventually, this is what he says kind of causes the collapse of his marriage. And it really does seem like a nightmare.
Responsibility for something.
Yeah, he kind of does with it. Like it does seem like this has to be like a terrifying sensation.
Oh, I have like that's horrible. Yeah. I would I can't wish that on him. Like that would probably be a legitimate tragedy. Like that is a nightmare world to be in.
Yeah.
And you probably are going to lash. It doesn't make it right. You shouldn't be lashing out at your spouse or anyone because something happened to you, but I can get it.
Yeah. People don't perform perfectly in situations where they're both frightened and like something fundamental about their nature has been physically compromised. As Scott later kind of described, I felt like I was a ghost in the room. It's hard to feel connected to others if you can't talk and they can't listen to you. And yeah, again, sounds terrible. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that's going to give you some fucking PTSD.
I would like to think there's an alternate reality where he's like, so I decided to start investing into nonprofits that help people who are deaf or whatever. But I know that's what's going to happen. I know why, because that's not about him.
Yeah, he doesn't dedicate his life to helping others as a result of this. It ends with him unable to talk entirely for a couple of years. And he pushes everyone away. He basically lives alone in his home, not communicating with anybody for an extended period of time. He considers suicide, but eventually he finds via Googling his symptoms enough that there is a rare condition that meets his experiences. He finds a doctor who specializes in it. He gets diagnosed finally, and the doctor offers him a risky pioneering surgery. And basically the way the surgery works is they cut the nerve that goes to the main muscle that's spasming, and then they graft a new nerve in its place to prevent the muscle from atrophying and to stop the old nerve, which was like defective, from growing back.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing that they did. The treatment is about 85% effective. That the doctor who does it says that about 85% of the time it provides, an improvement or complete cessation of symptoms, which is that's not bad odds, but also like a 15% chance that you never talk again is like that's scary. That's not low enough to not be terrifying, right?
That is a lot more than I would want to gamble on most things, much less my voice.
Yeah, it's scary, but again, by this point, he can't talk already, so he doesn't have any other options. So he has the surgery in 2008, the same year that he publishes the book where he blames all of his life problems on black people.
Of course.
And after 3 years of enforced isolation and near endless silence, he starts being able to talk again. And the way Scott describes it, the surgery works perfectly, and he's been fine ever since. Now, there is a theory, and you might call it a conspiracy. I don't know, conspiracy is the wrong term because there's no conspiracy here, but there's a theory that you get among people who follow Scott and have followed him really going insane on Twitter and stuff, that something goes wrong in this surgery and it damages his brain, and that causes some of the behavioral changes that we see in him after this point. I don't have any evidence of this. I've never heard the doctor obviously say anything about this. I don't know. It is true that after he has this surgery, 2008, this is the year where he becomes very rapidly, he becomes increasingly racist and aggressive online. But also, number one, I think I can see signs of the stuff that he would do later. And number two, I'm not saying there's no chance that something like that happened. That's a possibility. But rather than something fucking shady happening during the surgery, I find it kind of likelier that 3 years of not being able to speak, of losing every close relationship in his life, of being completely isolated, is what causes the behavioral changes for the worst.
Yeah, that sounds a lot more like it. And honestly, if nothing else, just you came out of this situation, where you are facing a permanent life-altering situation. Yeah, you may be fuck it, I'm just going to throw a caution to the wind. I'm a little hesitant to be oh, this brain, I feel weird about that because how can we know? That's, I don't say that about anybody who has surgery, really.
Yeah, I think that it's more, think about America. think about the COVID lockdown. Think about for how many people that period of isolation was the straw that broke the camel's back, that sent them spiraling into like Ashley Babbitt, you know, like it doesn't take, like we're all, a lot of us, most of us maybe are kind of fragile at any given moment. And like, this is an intense thing to deal with. I don't think I need much more than like, yeah, he lost the ability to talk for several years and it blew up his marriage and he lost everyone who was close to him for a while and lived alone as a hermit, not knowing what was wrong with him. Like, yeah, man, I can see that fucking you up. Yeah.
I mean, like, even if like, just like the everyone I care about left.
Yeah.
Or I push them away.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm like. Yeah. Oh my God. Like, I just can't even fathom like how that would mess with anyone.
I can see you not becoming the best version of yourself after that, right?
You're either going to go on a mea culpa tour and try to fix, or you're just going to say, well, shit.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and in 2008, Scott publishes the book 20 Years of Dilbert, which is what I've been quoting from several times. It's where he repeatedly blames diversity programs for the great failures of his life. And it's interesting because after this point, he also, like in this book, like he blames, you know, losing his job, not getting promoted on diversity programs. And he blames now in 2008, he blames Black people for the failure of his television show, saying, quote, "The show started out well, but in the second season, the network made a strategic decision to focus on shows with African-American actors. Dilbert lost its time slot and cancellation followed." And that's very different from the reasonable answer that he gives in 2006. It's also definitely not true. For the next 15 years or so, Scott is going to bring these incidents up with increasing regularity. In 2017, he tweeted, "I lost my TV show for being white when UPN decided it would focus on an African-American audience. That was the third job I lost for being white. The other two are in corporate America. They told me directly." Which is again different from the story he gives.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer around this time?
Yeah, man, it's not because you're white. Like, it was number one, UPN, not a great one run network. Number two, your show didn't find an audience. Most shows don't. Kind of getting 2 seasons isn't super common, bro. Like, you got actually more of a chance than most people. And it's like any reasonable person who gets to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars for drawing doodles would be like, I have no complaints about this system, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like this worked out perfect for me. Like, are you crazy, Scott? Like, you have been the luckiest anyone's ever been.
I've never been rich. I have supported myself. I've been able to support my spouse when they were going through grad school, off doing comics. I'm proud of that. I feel I'm very fortunate because I have not gone into an office to work since 2004. I feel I'm so lucky. This motherfucker's worth millions. Yeah, he's like Black people took my TV show. No, they fucking didn't. They just didn't like it. And no one else liked it either. We all disliked it. We all took it from you.
You have like $300 million and a mansion in California shaped like Dilbert's head because of your drawing. Like the system has. Me? Oh yeah, his house is shaped like Dilbert's head. Look it up.
That is absurd. That is the dumbest fucking thing.
Yeah. Oh. And it's funny because, again, he's like, they canceled it because they wanted to focus on shows with Black actors. Other people have pointed out Dilbert had the second lowest ratings of any show on television at the time it was canceled. This is like when Scott made his big post. It was because I was white. Like, people brought this up, and Scott goes ape shit, just like he did with Norman Solomon. He is unable to disengage, replying days later to his Twitter trolls, quote, "I successfully stirred up a hornet's nest of unsuccessful artists. They don't know they're part of the show. Don't tell them." I think he was kind of referring to like
I made everyone mad.
I'm a master. I was really manipulating. No, Scott, we're saying that like you have seen tremendous success, and the fact that not everything you did worked isn't something that Black people did to you. Like, it's most cartoons don't succeed. Yeah. Everyone I know I know more than most people of like people who have been very successful in Hollywood all of them have failures. All of them have more than one failure in their background, Scott. Like, look at Scott MacFarlane, right? Like, who's made God knows how much money doing cartoon shows. His first show gets canceled after like 2 or 3 seasons, right? He's out of the Seth MacFarlane, not Scott. Why am I saying? Yeah, Family Guy. He's out of like doing that for years when the show gets canceled. You know, like his got brought back because it developed a fan base, which the Dilbert show didn't. But
that's one interesting thing. You compare that because they both got brought back, like reran on Adult Swim. But Seth MacFarlane was like, well, shit, if you're going to rerun it, I'm going to do these bumpers and I'm going to lean into it. He actually worked on it. I wonder if Scott, well, I mean, I'm glad he didn't, but like if Scott Adams had put like effort like behind it, like that could have helped him too. He wanted it to work the way it was going to work, and it didn't happen that way. And so now also my suspicion, I'm not an expert on Seth MacFarlane lore, but my suspicion is that like for Seth, doing TV shows has been his whole motivating factor in life. And for Scott, he started off as an animator. That's where he began. Yeah, he worked. He worked for Cartoon Network. He did shorts in the 90s. I think he worked on a season of Johnny Bravo, even. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I suspect the reason he put in all that extra work on those bumpers and stuff is that, like, this is what he loved and wanted to do. Whereas for Scott, the Dilbert TV show was like a side gig in between drawing cartoons and trying to make burritos. You know, like
burrito ass cannons, good sir.
It's such a weird thing to be like, my like third job didn't pan out, so black people are engaged in a conspiracy against me. It's
and like
not evidence of great mental health. Yeah,
like if the entire black community was going to rally around, like we need to take one white man down, why the fuck would it be Scott Adams?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think he's saying that like it was these venal Hollywood types who wanted to get the black, viewer or whatever. But I also see no evidence of that. Like Hollywood, especially in the early 2000s, wouldn't have killed a successful show by a white guy to please the black community. It wasn't a successful show, Scott.
The only time I can think of like a CEO of a channel killing successful shows was in the early 70s when CBS did like the Rural Purge, where any show that took place or appealed to people in rural areas like Beverly Hillbillies and Hee Haw got canceled despite having amazing ratings because they didn't want to appeal to they would appeal to more urban viewers. But again, it was white people hurting white people.
Yeah. Again, Scott, very silly man. So who knows like why he suddenly starts to go down this road. But as he gets increasingly like obsessed with the ways in which he's been wronged by diversity, he also starts to get increasingly elaborate with like his lore as to why he thinks he's uncovered the secrets to success in the universe. And the best example of this is his concept of talent stacking. In 2013, he writes a book called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And it's him kind of pretending to be humble, where he's like, I was bad at all of this stuff and I still got super successful. And I got successful because, even though I wasn't great at any one thing, I had a bunch of little skills and they all synergized together to allow me to be a big success. I wasn't the best artist, but I understood kind of how to use the internet. And so I was able to take advantage of that to like promote my cartoon strip. And, that's why it was a big hit, right? Here's how he describes this concept more succinctly in his book, Win Bigly, which he publishes a few years later, in the early Trump years. Quote, a talent stack is a collection of skills that work well together and make the person with those skills unique and valuable. For example, a computer programmer who also knows how to do good user interface design would be more valuable than one who does not. The power of the talent stack idea is that you can intelligently combine ordinary talents together to create extraordinary value. The key concept here is that the talents in the stack work well with one another. Now, that's not wrong, but Scott, that's not a discovery, right? Like if you were to go up to a person on the street and be like, hey, do you think having more skills makes you more valuable? I'm going to guess 100% of people say like, yeah.
Yeah, that's
of course.
That's how work usually goes. Like,
yeah.
When you turn in a resume, they're not like, oh shit, he's got 8 skills opposed to 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, he's got a great talent stack. No, it's learning things is good. You're a more valuable coder if you know how to code more things, And just for like when it comes to like the artistic field, this is something that writers have talked about for a long time. Oftentimes, if you I mean, this goes back decades. You see like writers answering letters from fans. Advice they'll give is go out into the world, like experience things, meet people, that will make you a better writer. The more things you know about, the more things you can write about with verisimilitude. Robert Heinlein, has a great bit about like the creative value of having a broad base of skills, of knowing how to, harvest crops and skin an animal and, go fishing and, all these kind of like different things that are sort of like unrelated skills, because as Heinlein said, specialization is for insects, right? Like, again, what Scott has done here is he's taken a basic observation that is most people are aware of and that people have been talking about one way or another forever, and has reframed it in kind of the gamified language of hustle culture. And I'm not sure if this is just Scott trying to work a grift and knowing that he's just repackaging very obvious shit, or if he just hasn't read other people's writing, right? Like, does he legitimately think really that this is a revelation?
I can do it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but it is interesting, like this, and I think that kind of the way he does this by sort of like treating it as such of a dogmatic, like a skill tree in an RPG, I think kind of makes it sets you into this very like crystallized mode of thought that I think is more brittle and might make you less likely to pick up useful skills if you can't sort of like figure out how that skill is going to work in a talent stack, because like the skills Scott talks about that synergize together, he didn't like go into learning those things because he knew they would hybridize well. It was more just like living a life where you have a wide base of experiences makes you more versatile and more able to like adapt to the world. And that's the only real meaning of intelligence. But you know what else is intelligent?
Well, is it the products and services that wish to expand our minds and skill stacks?
That's right. Every single advertiser on this show is a member of Mensa. That's the only
there's
promise
some other
we make.
podcast will be excited to hear that.
I've never heard of another podcast talking about Mensa, but
nope.
Here we go. We are back. So, good stuff. Good stuff. So focusing obviously on acquiring talents that you can combine is a good thing. But I think Scott's talent stacking is kind of, I think the way he's framing this is more likely than making you talented. It's a very brittle way to interpret a phenomenon that, like, viewed properly can be liberatory. But I think looked at the way that Scott looks at it might lock you into a world where all you do is draw Dilbert and repackage old self-help books. But it works for Scott. He does get rich, which means he's never had to question the person that he's become or the ultimate value of his conclusions about the world. As the years go on, his work loses any edge of humility, and he veers increasingly towards megalomaniacal shit. His two novellas are the best example of this. He writes two fiction books in kind of the early aughts. One is called The Religion War, and one is called God's Debris. Have you read these books, Randy?
I have definitely never heard of them.
Oh boy. So
I'm always a little hesitant when I hear a cartoonist has written a novel.
Yep. Well, Scott considers this his real legacy, that like he will be remembered for these books. He said this, that like what I will be remembered for is my novels. He believes these are very deep and contain important truths about the human condition that no one else has elucidated before. Now, I have not read God's Debris. I have read The Religion War. These are both pretty short books. You can find them for free online if you want to steal them. Like, I don't think Scott put them up, but they're available, which is where I found them. So just Google them and Google the title and text if you want to read this shit. I have read The Religious War. Or The Religion War. I would charitably describe it as an atheistic rant that manages to be racist on an almost unique level. The basic plot, I will give Scott credit for this, is summarized efficiently in the first paragraph of the prologue. And here's Scott's book. Here's how it opens. In the year 2007, a brilliant and charismatic leader named Al-Z began his rise to power in the Palestinian territories. He was the architect of the 20-year plan for eliminating Israel, the success of which started a domino effect in the Middle East as one Arab dictatorship after another fell and their territories rolled into the Great Caliphate. Al-Z's subjects, heady from an unbroken string of victories, demanded the spread of Islam to the rest of the world. Al-Z understood that this was neither practical nor desirable, but to satisfy the appetite of his people, he began an unending war of minor terror against the Christian-dominated world. The attacks were calculated to be large enough to look like progress, yet small enough to avoid provoking all-out war. Publicly, he blamed renegade groups for the attacks. The Christian-dominated countries knew Al-Z was behind the bombings, but they depended on him for their oil and wanted to avoid a larger war that would cripple their economies and in all likelihood increase the number of bombings. Now, there's a lot that's insane about that. For one thing, Scott doesn't seem to know that there are Sunni and Shia Muslims, and that they disagree about a lot. Yeah. Neither of those words are in the book. Sunni doesn't show up. Shia doesn't show up. He doesn't mention Iran. Like, we don't know what the Shia world's supposed to be doing here. Like, he just is like, all of the Muslims are in a caliphate now because this guy. And so Al-Z, his plan to destroy Israel is like, he organizes the Palestinians to demand democratic rights, and like they become kind of quasi-equal partners in society, and then one day they murder all the Jews. Like, it's pretty fucked up.
This sounds like, honestly, a Christian novel that, like, my youth minister was recommended.
It kind of does. Now, he doesn't portray the Christians particularly sympathetically either, right? The big Christian general is also portrayed as a bad guy. It's more like a early internet atheist novel, but like, you know how a lot of those guys, those like internet atheists from the 90s after 9/11 went like super hard anti-Muslim.
Yes.
Scott's doing the same thing here, right? It's pretty fucked up. It's very racist. It's really funny. Like, Scott has convinced himself that his novel was prescient because it predicted the rise of ISIS. That's bullshit. That is not what Scott did. All he did was use the word caliphate, which ISIS also used, but also a bunch of governments have called themselves caliphates.
It's a very old term.
It's a thing. It goes back like 1,000 years. It's been a thing for a while.
I'm pretty sure it was in one of my D&D books, like for Al-Qadim. Yeah. Does that mean like Ed Greenwood of TSR in the early 90s predict ISIS?
It's also
what
like,
the fuck?
Scott is like, once they start winning, the victories just, number one, like the West is just kind of ignores their campaign of low-level terror, which we didn't. We like bombed the crap out of them. And number two, he has this idea that like, well, once a caliphate is declared, all of the Muslims just start clamoring to join it and take over. No, you know who actually defeated ISIS? Because I was there for quite a bit of it. It was Muslims, by the way. Like, whenever, like, I don't know, people shot at me, the folks who like threw their bodies in front of me, Muslims, the people who are like there day and night throwing like fucking with like hand grenades and fucking combat knives, clearing buildings of ISIS fighters, were also Muslims. I watched them pray in the mornings before they would go get fucking shot. Like, it very offensive to me. Fuck this guy. Yes, I am very frustrated by Scott Adams and his racist book, and that he thinks he predicted ISIS. Like, go fuck yourself, Scott.
I mean, but are you surprised, though, considering like everything else he's taking credit for at this point?
No, not at all. It just is like particularly galling. Yeah. So the way Scott writes about the caliphate, it shows his fundamental incuriosity about the world. He never expresses any understanding of the actual religious doctrine behind the strains of fundamentalist Islam most associated with terrorism. Even if this book was anti-Muslim hate speech, it might have come from a position of understanding, stuff like Salafism, right? It'd be one thing, it would still be bad, but if this was like anti-Muslim and really got into the nitty gritty of like different really problematic beliefs among extremist Muslims, like, Salafi Islam and stuff, that would at least show that like he was curious to an extent, but he simply is not. And the book itself does treat Christianity with a similarly broad brush. The American leader is this like general, like by the way, the whole West is part of the Christian Alliance. That's what they call themselves. With like, I don't know, man. I feel like so secular. I feel like all of the religious terrorism is part of why people have become more secular in the 21st century, as opposed to making everyone pick sides in a religion war. Like, it's just not what happened, Scott.
He is not fucking out. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's offensive it should be offensive to anyone who reads it. Now, the conflict between these two big blocks is resolved when Scott's self-insert character, who is a guru called the Avatar, the Avatar is like a wizard, but he's a wizard of smart, right? He's so logical, he's so rational that his ability to like talk to people and make rational arguments is effectively a superpower. And he solves the religion war because he finds an old lady who's like, he describes her as basically a super influencer, right? There's just this kind of mystical network of people who are really convincing. And if you find the right person, they'll talk to, 50 people and they'll convince all those people. And those people will talk to another 50 people. And then kind of in a very short order, everyone will be convinced of something, right? If you find the right person, you're able to like seed a thing in. And this old lady comes up with a joke where she's like, if God is so smart, why do people fart? And that revelation makes the entire world atheist, more or less. That's the plot. That's the plot of Scott's book.
I hate this. Yeah. Hey, by the way, if you're listening to this and you want to read actual novels written by cartoonists, Mel Lazarus, who did the comic Mama and Miss Peach's class, he actually wrote some. I'm told, I haven't read them. Watch a Harley Racist novel, but like novels like I think it was one's called like The Boss is Crazy Too, which was based off his time working in a CD magazine. Like find stuff like that that's meant to be fun and pulpy. What the fuck?
Yeah. Or on the other end of things, great cartoonist Alan Moore wrote a book called Jerusalem, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't read it. No one I know who loves Alan Moore has finished it, but you could put it on your bookshelf and occasionally read pages, and people will think you're very smart.
Also,
I'm sure it's a great book. One of these days I'll read it.
If it's Alan Moore, you probably just like absolutely end life with the fingers.
Yeah, I keep it on my belt next to my handgun in case there's a jam or something. It's much more effective than a combat knife. Wailing on some Nazi with a copy of Jerusalem. Yeah,
that's my new masturbation material. Thank you. I will remember that tonight.
Sorry, Alan. I love you.
I'm going to keep freaking out about this one. Keep going, please.
It's terrible. So God's Debris, which is the sequel, is even more outlandishly arrogant. Yeah, it's a sequel. The whole thing is like a pseudo-Socratic dialogue between a delivery boy and the Avatar from the first book. It is charity to call this freshman intro to psychology gobbledygook. Like most freshman psych students would write a better and more insightful book than this. I'm not going to punish you all with too much detail, but you can get an idea of what we're looking at here with this passage. And this delivery boy comes to give an old man a passage. The old man is the Avatar, and he's, I guess, going to like pass wisdom on to this kid. So like, here's the delivery boy talking to the Avatar. "It's for you," he said. That's the delivery boy. "What's for me?" the Avatar replies. "The package." "I just delivered the packages," I said. "My job is to bring them to you. It's your package." "No, it's yours." Okay, I said, planning my exit strategy. I figured I could leave the package in the hallway on the way out. The old man's caretaker would find it. "What's in the package?" I asked. I hoped to get past an awkward moment. "It's the answer to your question." I wasn't expecting any answers. "I understand," said the old man. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. He continued. "Let me ask you a simple question. Did you deliver the package, or did the package deliver you?" By then I was a little annoyed with his cleverness, but admittedly engaged. I didn't know the old man's situation, but he wasn't as feeble-minded as I'd first thought. I glanced at my watch, almost lunchtime. I decided to see where this was heading. "I delivered the package," I answered. That seemed obvious enough. "If the package had no address, would you have delivered it here?" I said no. "Then you would agree that delivering the package required the participation of the package. The package told you where to go." "I suppose that's true in a way, but it's the least important part of the delivery. I did the driving and lifting and moving. That's the important part." "How can one part be more important if each part is completely necessary?" he asked. Now, this is pointless. Like, there's no wisdom to be revealed in this. But also, like, it's like no delivery boy would be like, "Well, I'm the person, I'm responsible for why the package." No, the delivery would be like, "Look, man, this is my job. I got to make rent. Like, that's why I gave you this package. Someone told me to deliver a package here.
Goddamn package.
Yeah, like I have to do this to afford food and stuff. Like, that's why I'm here. That's what drove me here is my need for food."
I don't leave in 2 minutes.
Like, no, the package didn't make me come here. And like, we're not equally integral. The integral part of this is I need a job, and this is the job that I have. Will you please sign for the fucking package, asshole?
Oh.
Like, God, it's frustrating. In general, I think Scott Adams is maybe the single person who handled the social media era the worst. There were signs that this was going to be the case with him from early on. Having to filter his ideas through editors at comic syndicates and publishers kept the most problematic stuff out of his work. When he was allowed to just vomit his thoughts to people, things got really dark really fast. And an early sign that this was going to be the case came in 2006 when he made a blog post about how he didn't vote because he was too ignorant, right? Now, I don't disagree with Scott there. I don't want him voting either. But he immediately segues off of this into very wild territory, starting with the fact that, like, he's like, I think that the news doesn't provide us with enough context to make a decision. So, for example, I just learned recently that Iran has 25,000 Jewish citizens. And everybody's talking about how anti-Semitic the president of Iran is. But there's all these Jewish people living in Iran. So does that mean that the president is anti-Semitic in the I'm going to kill people way? Or is he just kind of a bigot? The media hasn't provided me with the context that I need here. And for one thing, like, you could look up life for Jewish people in Iran. Like, there's Jewish people who have like left Iran or who still live there probably, who you can find like their feelings on the matter. You could look this up. Like, there's newspapers that have written articles about this, Scott. The fact that every newspaper that talked about, this is during like when everyone was flipping out over Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, because he made some statements about Israel. The fact that like every news article on Ahmadinejad didn't like go into detail about life for Jewish Iranians doesn't mean that like that context is not provided elsewhere by the media. You chose not to look into it. And for some reason, from that very strange statement, we veer into Holocaust denial. So here's Scott again.
Damn it.
I'd also like to know how the Holocaust death toll of 6 million was determined. Is it the sort of number that's so well documented with actual names and perhaps a Nazi paper trail that no historian could doubt its accuracy, give or take 10,000? Or is it like every other LRN, large round number, that someone pulled out of his ass and it became true by repetition? Does the figure include resistance fighters and civilians who died in the normal course of war, or just the Jews rounded up and killed systematically? No reasonable person doubts that the Holocaust happened, but wouldn't you like to know how the exact number was calculated just for context? Without that context, I don't know if I should lump the people who think the Holocaust might have been exaggerated for political purposes in with the Holocaust deniers. If they are equally nuts, then I'd like to know that. I want context. You know what, Scott? You can get context because there's libraries full of books people have written calculating the death toll of the Holocaust. All of these questions have been answered numerous times by both journalists and historians. You chose not to seek that out. It's not a problem that every article that mentions the Holocaust and its death toll doesn't go into detail about how that death toll was calculated, because that's not good article writing. You don't like, it would be like every time I talk about fucking climate change, I discuss like how fucking internal combustion engines work. Like, it's simply not necessary context every single time, but it's super easy to learn about how the Holocaust death toll was calculated. And if you were to just have typed into Google in this period of time, how was the Holocaust death toll calculated, you would find answers to this question. And if people at home are curious, the Holocaust Encyclopedia, operated by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, has a page titled Documenting Numbers of Victims in the Holocaust and Nazi Persecution, which you and Scott Adams can peruse at your leisure if you want. This is not hard stuff. It's easy to find. You do not have to be a historian to learn the basic answers to the questions that Scott is asking here.
It's so blatant. The whole thing is like, no one's covered this means I didn't have the curiosity to go find out.
Yeah. No, man, you didn't look. Like, why isn't the media telling me about this? Well, they did. You didn't read those articles. There's a lot of articles, Scott.
And you didn't want to know about it. Like, I can hand my toddler evidence that if she cleans her room up, she will not trip over her toys. She's not going to read that. She doesn't give a shit. She's going to keep her toys out.
It's like if I bought a car that didn't have a manual in it, and then I drove it and never changed the oil until like the engine broke, and then I was like, they didn't give me the context. Well, like, yeah, man, you can look up how do I maintain a car? What does this light on my dashboard mean? What do these noises from my car mean? It's not hard to get that answer. Like, it is not the fault of the fucking car manufacturer that you chose to act like a helpless babe. This is all a really perfect example of the kind of dumb that Scott gives us. He thinks that, like, saying this, that being like, well, I just want context. What about this? What about that?
Don't forget the whole, like, I'm not saying it didn't happen.
Yeah. ... Yeah. Like, he thinks that this makes him look not just deep and wise, but like kind of the cynical prankster wise man, like the Avatar in his books. Like, you just accepted that number without thinking. Maybe now you'll think more about the things you accept without thinking. No, you should actually like try to learn the answers to the questions that you're asking because they're very readily available, Scott Adams. It's like, I don't know, very frustrating. It's like, I think his attitude is that, like, when we talk about, for example, Holocaust deniers shooting up synagogues and murdering Jewish people, every article about that should include a digression about, like, the estimated kill rate during Acton Reinhard and how it compares to the rate of killing in Rwanda. Like, that's literally what I think he's saying, which is nuts and stupid, and he should feel bad. And also, somebody should throw pee at him. Anyway, for the sake of fairness, I should note that at this point, Scott's ill-considered political rants are not always entirely on the wrong side, although there's always an element of wrongness to them. In May of 2008, he wrote a blog post making fun of people who complained about illegal immigrants, and that's a noble cause. Mm-hmm. There are some cringeworthy lines in the post, like, Mexicans have great looking skin that resists sunburn. I have skin that looks like tapioca spilled on canvas.
It sounds like this is skin Mexican people. What the fuck? Yeah,
Scott, you don't need to get into that. Scott continued posting, though, and he eventually started to draw criticism when other people realized that the unfiltered Dilbert guy was a dick. This happened first in a big way when he made this 2011 post complaining about the unfair treatment of women. The reality is that women are treated differently by society for exactly the same reason that children and the mentally handicapped are treated differently. What? It's just easier this way for everyone. You don't argue with a 4-year-old about why you shouldn't eat candy for dinner. You don't punch a mentally handicapped guy, even if he punches you first. And you don't argue when a woman tells you she's only making 80 cents to your dollar. It's the path of least resistance. You save your energy for more important battles. So Scott posts this stupid thing because he's a dumb asshole, and he gets made fun of on a blog called Feminist. And so he can't handle people not agreeing with him or not thinking he's smart. So he leaps into the comment section to defend himself and argue against everybody. Uh-oh. And immediately, because he's not good at arguing, he just kind of gives that up and starts insulting people for their poor reading comprehension. He also suggests that they all secretly agree with him and know he's right and are just arguing with him for the sake of their own egos. Then he makes a blog post a few days later reiterating all the points that had made everyone mad, but insisting that everyone, like, had just gotten him wrong and that, like, Dilbert readers are smart enough, but other people didn't get it. I'm actually going to read a quote from EW.com here, like summarizing the fallout. Adams insisted that his post was some sort of forensic exercise that his loyal readers, he presents them as sort of uber-rational Dilbert nation, understand. But he did eventually offer an apology. To the best of my knowledge, no one who understood the original post or its context was offended by it. But to the women who were offended by their own or someone else's interpretation of what I wrote, I apologize. Thank you for making my week so interesting.
You chose to be offended by your own interpretation of what...
Yeah, it was all just a game from me, the puppet master, but I'm sorry if it hurt you. Like, Scott, just look, if you want to believe shitty things, just like say them on your massive platform and ignore the people who argue with you.
Say it with your chest.
Yeah, don't be a little baby about this. Like, he's such a wimp.
Is this the time he made sock puppet accounts to defend himself, or is that?
Oh boy, that's where we're heading to. So the attention, because this kind of goes viral, more and more people start to watch his blog posts and then they start to realize, like, wow, he says dumb shit all the time. Like, he's constantly saying bullshit without knowing anything about the shit he's talking about. So in the mid-aughts, it kind of becomes sport in a couple places online to make fun of bad Scott Adams posts, and Scott can't handle it. So he starts to make fake accounts on Metafilter and Reddit under the pseudonym Planned Chaos, where he's doing this puppet master thing, and he pretends to be someone else defending himself, because apparently his rational super fans aren't like good enough to actually do the job for him. Here's an example of a Planned Chaos post. If an idiot and a genius disagree, the idiot generally thinks the genius is wrong. He also has lots of idiot reasons to back his idiot belief. That's how the idiot mind is wired. It's fair to say you disagree with Adams, but you can't rule out the hypothesis that you're too dumb to understand what he's saying. And he's a certified genius. Just saying. First of all, argument to authority. Like, if you want to be like a big fucking rules D&D for real life guy, like that's the argument to authority. You're not actually defending yourself. Like, that's evidence that you've kind of like that whatever argument you're making is completely hollow, because you have to rely on like, well, he's a genius, so you just don't understand him. But also, that's just like such a sniffly little wuss thing to do. Like, say it under your own name, you fucking coward.
Yeah, that's what bothered. Like, well, that's not the biggest thing that bothers me about Scott Adams, but it's like, I have never understood making a sock puppet account to defend yourself. Like,
it's sad. It's weak. Anyway, whatever. Once Trump began his campaign for president, Scott's behavior accelerated. He predicted a Trump primary win. Fair enough. Gets that one right. And then he takes back his endorsement of Trump, though, after the Access Hollywood tape, and he endorses Gary Johnson, which he'll later come to regret and try to explain away. But it is very funny. Once Trump wins, he publishes a book called Win Bigly, in which he argues that he and Trump are both master persuaders, and Trump was ushering humanity into a bold new world with his master persuader techniques. He becomes increasingly partisan during the Trump years, but also increasingly silly and deeply irresponsible, would be fair to say. In 2019, you guys remember the Gilroy Garlic Festival mass shooting that was carried out by that kind of fascist guy?
Yeah.
Real fucked up. Scott uses the tragedy as an excuse to publish a video app he's made called WinHub, which he's created as like a news gathering tool. And he's like, while like the shooting is going on, he's telling people to use this to like report on what's happening. If they're like, it's pretty fucked up. Like, there's a lot of debate in our culture about like what it is and isn't appropriate to do in the wake of a mass shooting. But I think we can all agree trying to plug your app is not appropriate.
Yeah, that's a bit offsides.
Yeah, that's just bad. That's just real fucked up, Scott. A write-up in MSN notes, Adams didn't make major waves with a February 2021 comic that poked fun at those who received a coronavirus vaccine, but he did ruffle feathers when he espoused debunked claims that people who weren't vaccinated fared better than those who were, in a video shared by the Just Think podcast. In the 2020s, his political statements also started to focus more on race. At the beginning of 2022, he tweeted that he was going to self-identify as a black woman until Biden picks his Supreme Court nominee, which the president had vowed would be a black woman. And then in June of 2020, Adams tweeted that when the Dilbert TV show ended in 2000 after just 2 seasons, it was the 3rd job I lost for being white. So Scott's madness crescendos after the 2022 Highland Park mass shooting. This, like so many mass shootings, was carried out by a very young man, 21 years old. Rather than seeing this as perhaps a reason to explore more restrictive laws as to when firearms can be purchased, or perhaps as a sign of deeply toxic aspects of our culture and the things that young men in it are raised to believe, Scott posted one of the craziest things I've ever seen on Twitter, which is an app fueled entirely by mental breakdowns. Here's Scott, again in the wake of a mass shooting. The Highland shooting and every fentanyl overdose death among the young are teaching us the same lesson, and we refuse to learn it. It's difficult, but I'm qualified to give you this lesson, unfortunately.
God damn it.
This won't be easy to read. When a young male, let's say 14 to 19, is a danger to himself and others, society gives the supporting family 2 options. Number 1, watch people die. And number 2, kill your own son. Those are your only options. I chose 1 and watched my stepson die. I was relieved he took no one else with him. If you think there is a 3rd choice in which your wisdom and tough love, along with government services, fixes that broken young man, you are living in a delusion. There are no other options. You have to either murder your own son or watch him die and maybe kill others. There is a sad reality behind this. That's like fucked up. That's real bad. First off, not true. I mean, among other things, I did an interview when I was still working with crack at a young man who attempted to carry out a mass shooting at his school. This was back in the late 90s, and got caught and stopped, thankfully, before he was able to shoot anybody. But he had the guns he was about to start. He was penalized, obviously. Like, he was sent to, I think, a mental institution for a while. But, like, he's like, it's been decades. He's like a normal person. He's got a life now. He's like, hasn't killed anyone. Like, you can, in fact, intervene in people who are like going in dark directions, and they can be saved. It happens all the time. Part of why it doesn't get more attention is that a guy shooting up a school obviously is a thing that people are going to pay attention to all the times, every single day, in which a mentor comes across a kid who's starting to head under a dark path and like reaches that, convinces that person, you know, every time that a parent like sees that their child is starting to like embrace toxic aspects of like belief and behavior, and starts to talk to them and you know, starts to work with them and tries to understand and counsel them. Every time like people get pulled back from that brink, it doesn't like, you don't get a news story about that, right? Like, obviously, like, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's kind of fucked up to say that like once people start to show that they have that they're fetishizing violence, that you know, they're embracing like racist or problematic beliefs, or that they're, you know, you're starting to get addicted to drugs, that there's no way to save them. Like, if you've lived a life, you know, people who have been pulled away from all sorts of fucked up things, or who have like gone too far down a dark road and pulled themselves back. It happens all the time. Not that it's like easy or simple. These are terrible things to deal with as a kid, having a child who like you think might shoot up a school. That's a terrifying position to be in but like people get pulled away from that kind of stuff. Now, there is a sad...
What happened to his stepson? That is a...
Well, that's what we're about to talk about.
Oh, no.
So, it's a pretty sad story. Scott's stepson was involved in a serious bicycle accident at age 14. He suffered severe brain damage, which caused him to lose all impulse control, and he became terribly addicted to drugs and eventually died of a fentanyl overdose in 2018. This is a horrible story. There's a video in 2018 when Scott gets the news where he's just like weeping to his audience, and I have no doubt that it's genuine.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's I don't want to brag on him for losing a child.
No, I don't either. But like, number one, I think that 2018 video doesn't look to me like a man who like gave up on a child. It looks to me like a man who's sad because what he was doing didn't work. And I think it's very depressing that like the lesson he took out of this is that like you can't save people when they start to have problems. Obviously, everyone can't be saved. Clearly, Scott's stepson, whatever was going on, like, was not something he was able to pull out of, and that's a tragedy. I know multiple people who had serious addictions to like things that were going to kill them and stopped, you know? I have friends who like, I have a fucking friend who survived shooting himself. Like, people come through terrible things and build lives afterwards. And the attitude that like when a young man is troubled, all you can do is let them die or murder them is such a bad thing to take out of this experience.
Okay, that sounds sociopathic.
It is, and it's also one of the things that's really problematic to me about this is that like he is bringing his stepson's death up in the context of a man who went on a mass shooting and murdered people. His stepson just had a drug addiction. Having a drug addiction and dying as a result of it is not in the same moral universe as shooting strangers to death with a fucking rifle.
No.
Like, comparing those two things is insane.
Well, I think it's the whole mentality of, addiction is a moral failing, not a disease.
Yeah, it's like, number one, especially in this case, like, this is a kid who's got like brain damage and he has no impulse control, which is sad and hard to deal with, but like, it's not the same as deciding to murder people. You shouldn't be talking about these things together.
They're not even in the same realm.
No, like, it's one of those things. Scott So obviously the culmination of this, where we are now, is that earlier this year, Scott made a number of super racist comments about black people and about how like white people just need to stop talking to and stop being, you know, associated with black people, stop living with black people. We just have to separate. Like, it's pretty fucked up shit. And like everyone gets this is like the straw that finally breaks the camel's back. He says something that like the normies take, you know, note of, and it leads to the collapse of his cartooning career. In like the space of a week, he gets dropped by shitloads of newspapers. His syndicate, his publisher drop him. Everybody drops him. And Scott, again, tries to do kind of I was really trying to make this very intelligent point, and all the really smart people got what I was trying to say in context, but the dumb people got angry. My argument, Scott, is that a writer who repeatedly fails to get his point across to his audience is bad at writing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yep.
It's one thing I remember from all of that, because I did have people contact me and like ask if I wanted to do quotes. I was like, not really. Like, contact a cartoonist of color. That's who you should be talking to, not me. But like, one thing I will always remember about it was feeling like I saw people like, you know, applauding the syndicate, Andrew's Universal.
Yeah.
Andrew McNeil Universal. And I'm like, yeah, they did it, but like it took this.
Yeah.
This was like, there weren't even dog whistles before this. Like there were countless points where they could have stood up and said, no, that's too far, dude.
Yeah.
But like it literally got to a point where newspapers had to say, oh, you're going to lose this spot. And it finally hurt. And now they're like, oh, well, we're not going to stand by it. No, you're not going to stand by the fact that you're losing money. If you had the morality, and again, I should point out, I'm saying this is myself, not on behalf of King Features or Hearst Media, my syndicate. Just my perspective, if you really had any morality, he would have been dropped a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like this, like the bigotry has been there in display for a while. And now you're like, oh, now you have the morality because you're losing newspapers. Nah.
Now, I will say
isn't
I
he
am
just putting the
speaking
comic
on behalf.
online now?
Yeah, he's got his comic online. You can still read Dilbert if you want to for some reason. It is now entirely focused on like weird cancel culture grievance shit. But yeah, if you want that in your life, it's still available somewhere. And it's one of those things, you know, you are not speaking on behalf of anyone else. I am speaking on behalf of my corporation. I am speaking on behalf of both Cool Zone Media and iHeartRadio when I assure everyone Scott Adams lives inside of a mansion shaped like Dilbert's head, with a swimming pool out back also shaped like Dilbert's head, where he spends all of his recreational time. Right now, Scott is sitting in a swimming pool shaped like Dilbert's head, angry that people on the internet are making fun of him. And if you want to let Scott know that, let him know that you know that he lives in a house shaped like the head of Dilbert. I think he'd appreciate that. Maybe it'll save him.
I also remember, didn't he finally introduced a black character in his comic in the last year or so?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The first strip was literally using the black character to shit on trans people.
Yeah, it's very, very Scott Adams. Everything he does is very Scott Adams.
It's like that one shitty kid you went to school with who this is the only attention he can get. And he's so proud of it. And when people hate him, it's like, I won. No, you're just pathetic.
Yeah, you're just kind of sad, brah.
And like, oh, he could literally say, you know what? I'm not talking to anybody. I'm going to sit and enjoy my money for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Valid. Go for it. And we'd all be happier.
Again, there's not a single human being on the face of the earth who has a bad opinion of Bill Watterson.
No, I mean, well, probably the syndicate who used to deal with them.
Probably the syndicate because he cost him a lot of money. But like, fucking A, you know? He was like, I made this for 10 years. I feel like if I keep making it, the quality will drop. I'm going to go paint landscapes somewhere in the rural Midwest for the rest of my life.
And Jim Davis, again, like, you may not like Garfield.
Yeah.
You may think it's a shallow comic or whatever, but every cartoonist or every person who's ever dealt with him He's a sweetheart. He is very supportive.
He is a nice man. He has never leapt into a fucking culture controversy. He knows that's not what we need from the Garfield man. I don't need to know the Garfield guy's opinion on any of this stuff.
Like, what was it, that comic Garfield minus Garfield when it came up? He could have easily squashed that. Instead, he's like, no, that's a great idea. Keep doing it, guys.
Yeah, keep doing it. Like, it's one of those, like, Jim Davis is never going to, like, come in and be like, here's what everyone needs to know about, like, race mixing from Jim Davis.
God.
Like, he's never going to give you that. And that's, again, earned his money. Good for you, Jim Davis. And you know what, Scott, just for some evidence of what you could be like, Jim Davis lives in a house shaped like Garfield's head, and we don't make fun of him for it because we respect Jim Davis.
You do you, Jim Davis. Just keep on hating Mondays and tell us how cats need lasagna. Yeah. And weird abuse of Odie and John creeping on the vet. That's
sure.
You've made it. You've made it.
Yeah.
Although, give us a better explanation what happened to fucking Lyman, Davis. I don't accept
what happened to Lyman, Davis. Yeah. That's some real deep Garfield lore for those of you who are real Garfield heads. Anyway, there's actually like a shocking amount of very deep and unsettling online Garfield lore. People should seek it out.
There is some really terrifying.
Seek it out on a dark night when you're alone in your house and really delve into the dark Garfield hole. But you know what other hole people should delve into?
These ads and services?
No. Your
Oh, yes, my holes. My deep dark holes.
Yeah. Your holes.
Well, if you want to find me online, my online comic, Something Positive, has been going around for 21 years. It is at somethingpositive.net. Or if you want to read a new Popeye strip every Sunday that makes apparently certain uncles on Facebook mad, go to comicskingdom.com/Popeye every Sunday. Yeah. And thank you guys for having me. This has been, I'm hesitant to say fun. It could have been worse. Yeah. It could have been a John K episode. It could have been John.
Yeah, we'll get to Califranakis, or however it's pronounced, one of these days.
John, awful human being who, I don't know. Spunko, Ren and Stimpy.
A lot of great animator bastards out there. But
again, I work in a field where look, we're left alone in dark rooms for hours on end. Yeah. It's going to go one of two ways.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know this, but Gahan Wilson helped build the Hiroshima bomb. Look it up, people. Look it up. It's out there. Find the evidence.
I almost made a joke about one of my predecessors on Popeye, but I'm pretty sure I would get a severe talking to. So they were all faultless, lovely men. Mm-hmm. All of them.
Just like everyone who's ever worked for Clear Channel Communications. Anyway, that's the podcast, everybody. Have a great night.
Wait, what about where they can find you?
The internet. Oh, yeah, I have a book called After the Revolution. You can find it anywhere you find books. Like, type it wherever you get your books. Type it in. Go to a bookstore, with some sort of crude weapon, ideally a copy of Jerusalem by Alan Moore, and threaten the teller until they buy a copy of my book, After the Revolution. That's how you do it.
And if you, the listeners who do not enjoy ads about Reagan's gold coins, would like to listen to this very podcast and all other Cool Zone Media podcasts ad-free, either coming soon or already out, depending on when you're listening to this, we have Cooler Zone Media, our ad-free subscription channel, exclusively on Apple Podcasts. Is that right, Robert? Did I do it?
That is correct. Yeah, sorry everybody. It's just for people with iPhones, but that is most of our listeners.
One day I will matter.
We apologize to everyone else. We'll figure it out. I'm an Android user too, we're all in this together. But sadly, it's harder than you'd think to work stuff like this out. Anyway,
we've requested
Cool Zone Media, Apple Podcasts.
Behind the Bastards is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.